Emil Durkheim sought to categorize forms of suicide as to avoid claiming that suicide is an individual psychological characteristic. According to Durkheim, suicide is a direct source of social deviance. It is believed that it falls between two variables, social integration and social regulation. Rising or dropping on either the y-axis or x-axis of the graph of normative theory of suicide can pull you from what may be considered essential to having a normal life. The categories are as follows. Egoistic suicide, according to Durkheim, is from not being very well integrated in a group. Altruistic suicide is when someone experiences too much social integration. Anami suicide results from little social integration, and fatalistic suicide results from too much social integration. These variables can be found all throughout history within the realms of culture, politics, and the economy. Here are some examples of how these categories of fatalistic, altruistic, egoistic, and anami fit into history. Historically, many prisoners and slaves would commit suicide, but not because of the physical hardship of their conditions. Durkheim's research suggests that it was a fatalistic suicide because of the mental torture of monotony. In other words, lack of variety and interest, tedious repetition, and routine. In some cases, because of too much social integration, the higher-ranked military officers committed suicide, more often than enlisted soldiers because of the immense pressure of honor and self-worth to their country. In Durkheim's era throughout Europe, Jews killed themselves the least often compared to Protestants and Catholics. It can be said that this is due to the reaction of when a social group is persecuted or rejected by the so-called mainstream. Its members often bond together for protection from prosecution. That is why the Jews had the lowest suicide rates back then in Europe, and why in the United States today, African Americans have one of the lowest suicide rates. It is a result of their bonding as a minority group, united in a common struggle against history of oppression. More examples of suicide throughout history are those who conducted the harakiri, which is a Japanese suicide ritual where samurai warriors who had failed their group in battle would disembowel themselves with a sword rather than continue to live as a disgrace in their community. In World War II, Japanese kamikaze pilots would deliberately crash their planes into Allied warships because their country was facing imminent defeat. Suicides especially increased after their defeat in World War II, which altered the lives of many and may have brought shame. Sati, or suti, would be when Hindu widows, as early as the 16th century in some regions of India, were expected to throw themselves on their husband's funeral pyre, or cremation, to prove their devotion. It is now illegal and extremely rare in India. In the 1920s, after the stock market crashed, it was common for businessmen to jump out of skyscraper windows. These stockbrokers and investors felt as if their lives were forever ruined and would never be the same again. Durkheim would call this a perfect example of anomie. In ancient Egypt, many slaves and workers of the pharaohs and other important rich people were buried along with their master when they died. They thought that whatever was buried with them was taken with them to the afterlife. In the world, there are roughly over 1 million suicides each year. There are certain countries that are more prevalent than others in suicides. For example, the Black Forest, located at the bottom of Mount Fuji in Japan, has over 100 suicides per year. It is dense with tall trees and long-reaching branches. It is the second most popular place for suicide behind the Golden Gate Bridge. It could be said that the categories for suicide, according to Durkheim, can all be found in the Black Forest. On average, there is one successful suicide out of every 25 suicide attempts. Most recently, in the year 2010, 38,000 Americans committed suicide. In America, 90% of people who have committed suicide are found to have a mental disorder, substance abuse problems, or both. Drug or alcohol abuse increases the risk of suicide by over 6 times. In Texas, people are more likely to commit suicide in smaller counties than they are in large cities. Nonetheless, suicides are prevalent. In the beginning of 2010, an Austin man committed suicide by crashing an airplane into the IRS building because he felt they were stripping him of his life, taking away his home. This was a successful suicide but injured 13 others. Suicide is also a threat on university campuses, including the University of Texas. Late 2010, a student was seen walking through campus with an AK-47. He entered the PCL, went up to the top floor, and shot himself. The Huffington Post states that suicide is a much greater threat to persons of college age than homicide. UT, for example, has only seen 2 homicides perpetrated over the last 30 years. Contrast that statistic to the 6 suicides over the last 12 months. Tellingly, even the 2 murders, which were perpetrated by a single individual, ended in suicide. Typically, UT experiences only 3 or 4 suicides per year. Since this public incident, UT has been more proactive in suicide prevention and are continually working to keep students safe and mentally sound.